Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Just, as we're kind of getting ready for the meeting, just want to remind you guys, make sure to turn off those cameras and make sure that you keep yourselves muted. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll be happy to get you answers to those as quickly as we can. But we're going to jump right in today and not waste a minute. Today's session is session 9, which is going to focus on vocabulary. Very important part of early literacy instruction. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about this today because I think this is one of those things that, we know it's very important, but we might not know exactly what we need to do in terms of teaching vocabulary. A lot of different ideas out there. So hopefully we'll get you guys some good information as you get ready to start this new school year, and you'll feel ready and prepared to really support your students. I know I have some of my regulars in here, so thank you guys for joining us today. Again, it's great to see you guys. But for those of you who are new, my name is Sarah Stolman. I am the K-2 Literacy PD Specialist here at the Louisiana Department of Education. And my job is to help you, is to support you. So if there's anything that you need, if you have questions about literacy, if you're getting ready to set up your class and you want to talk through some things, send me an email. Let's set it up. We can talk. You can always email me at sarah.stolman@la.gov. And also, if you just want to extend the conversation more broadly, we're encouraging everybody to celebrate all of those wonderful things you're doing on social media using the hashtag Louisiana Literacy and the hashtag Reading Revival, because we are in the midst of a reading revival and it's so exciting to be a part of this. We're feeding off of the energy that you guys have and the excitement that you guys have, pushing our students to achieve greater literacy outcomes than ever before. So I'm excited to be a part of that, and I'm excited to support you in your very important work. Now, in our last session last week, we talked a lot about the importance of background knowledge. So we spent some time explaining that importance of building a solid knowledge base among our students, particularly among K-2 students. I think oftentimes when we get kind of laser focused on teaching those foundational skills at K-2, and that is our kind of superpower as K-2 teachers, I think, or K-3 teachers even. But that doesn't mean that we just kind of turn a blind eye to background knowledge, right? That's a very important part of a comprehensive literacy program is providing students with that knowledge, that background that will support them as they start to read on their own so that they're able to comprehend in increasingly sophisticated ways. And vocabulary is going to be a big part of that, right? Because vocabulary is directly tied to reading comprehension too. And we also talked last time about explaining how knowledge impacts comprehension, right? Like students who have a greater amount of knowledge are better comprehenders. Research consistently shows that. Students who approach a text with some knowledge of that text already or some knowledge about that topic are able to maybe fill in any gaps in foundational skills that they might have, but they're able to understand it more deeply than someone who's approaching it with no background knowledge or no knowledge of that content. So it's really important, and vocabulary is part of that. So that's why I'm excited today to spend a whole session talking just about vocabulary, because really, you need to understand what the words mean, right, in order to comprehend them. So today's objective is that by the end of this session, participants are going to be able to explain how vocabulary is an essential part of reading comprehension, and then also share ideas for how we can build our students' vocabulary so that they can engage more deeply with complex texts, right? This is something we can teach, and our students can grow in this area, right? It's not just something some kids have a great vocabulary and some don't. This is something that really we as teachers can support and develop in our students through, well-planned systematic instruction. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like today, and the variety of different ways that we can support increasing our students' vocabulary. And I'm excited about that. So I always like to start off by just kind of looking at it like from a big picture. But we talk. Our question is, how is vocabulary related to reading comprehension? So I always want to bring us back to Scarborough's reading rope, right? And we can see nestled right there in that language comprehension strand is a thread focused exclusively on vocabulary, right? Right there under background knowledge. So in order for students to really comprehend what they're hearing or what they're reading, they have to have a sufficient vocabulary. They have to understand what those words mean. They have to have a fairly wide understanding of words or a wide knowledge of words. We might refer to that as their breadth. And they have to make connections between those words, link similar words, be able to understand, okay, this means this and this means the opposite of this. And that's very important work in terms of building their ability to comprehend text so that they can engage in skilled reading, which is truly our ultimate goal as teachers. Now, what is vocabulary and why is it important? So the National Reading Panel, in its report from 2000, identifies vocabulary as one of the 5 key components of reading instruction. It goes hand in hand with phonemic and phonological awareness, decoding, phonics, all of these things that we've talked about so far in this series. Vocabulary is an equal part. Students with larger vocabularies can understand new ideas and concepts much easier than those with more limited vocabularies. If a student doesn't understand the words, they're really going to struggle. But if they have a wide vocabulary, it's much easier for them to grasp concepts or topics that may be new to them because they have that word understanding that facilitates that. And then like all of the things that we've talked about in this series, language measures such as vocabulary in young children can predict later difficulties with reading comprehension. Students with limited vocabulary early on, it's highly correlated with later reading difficulties. So it's an important area for us to focus as teachers because it's a way we can mitigate later struggles, right? Building that vocabulary. Now, one interesting thing to note, and I mean, it's not unexpected. It's kind of what we might think, but really students who lack adequate vocabulary have difficulty getting meaning from what they read. So as you might expect, they're going to read less because they find reading difficult, right? They're constantly coming across words that they don't know. Reading is going to be more of a struggle for them. So they're going to derive less enjoyment from reading and they're going to stop reading or they're not going to read as much as their peers just because they find it difficult and less enjoyable. And students have to add significantly to their vocabulary each year if they're going to have a sufficient vocabulary to support their comprehension of texts that are appropriate for their grade level. The National Reading Panel has kind of whittled it down and said that kids really have to learn 2,000 new words a year or so in order for them to kind of keep pace with their grade level peers. So it's very important for us to be intentional about this work in terms of developing their ability to use and understand more and more words. Now, again, vocabulary, what is it? What do I mean by vocabulary? And it refers to the words that students can both understand and use to express their ideas. So when we were talking about kind of that, the words that they understand or their listening vocabulary, sometimes we might call it their receptive vocabulary. These are the words that students understand. And then on the flip side, we have what we might call our expressive vocabulary or our speaking vocabulary. These are words that students can use appropriately to communicate their thoughts or their ideas. These are words that they own, they can use appropriately, they make sense, and they can express their thinking with that. Now, it's, as you might expect, it's not uncommon for students to have a much larger receptive vocabulary than expressive vocabulary. We see this a lot with like our really young children, toddlers, babies and toddlers and pre-K students, right? You can give them a lot of instructions, they understand a lot, but it's much harder for them to put the words together and express themselves. So their expressive vocabulary is much more limited than their receptive vocabulary, right? But as they grow, what they understand and what they can express kind of comes together and becomes fairly equivalent. But at those youngest ages, we know it's much, they understand much more they understand much more than they can express. So when we think of a student's vocabulary, and if we go back to kind of Scarborough's reading rope, they highlight these things too, but there are three things we really want to consider, right? We want to consider the breadth of a student's vocabulary. How many words do they recognize, right? Do they have a very limited, or does their vocabulary lack breadth? Or do they have an expansive vocabulary? There's students who are using words and you're like, where did you learn that? Right? Do they have a very wide vocabulary so they can, almost speak like little professors or little adults? And so we think about the breadth of their vocabulary. Then we think also about the depth of their vocabulary. How many words do they know deeply, right? They own these words. They can use these words freely. They're part of their regular discourse, and we think about that a lot. And then we think about precision. Are they able to use these words precisely? Are they using them correctly 100% of the time? Are they using them in the appropriate contexts? And can they make links between these words, right? Do they know them at such a level that they can start to identify synonyms with these words or even antonyms, right? So we think about the breadth, the depth, and the precision. And as teachers, we work to build each of these areas. We want them to have, a wider vocabulary, a deeper vocabulary, a vocabulary that they're able to use with increasing levels of precision and appropriateness. Now, as we talked about at the very beginning of this session, this is probably something we don't think about a lot, right? Like, how do we teach vocabulary? I remember back when I was in school many ages ago, we'd have like 10 vocabulary words. We'd have to go look them up in the dictionary and then we'd write a sentence with them. And then, sometimes they make you write the word 5 times or something like that. And reflecting back, that's not fundamentally wrong, right? But I think there are much better ways and much more efficient ways that we can do that. Now, Michael Graves really suggests this great 4-part approach to teaching vocabulary. And we're going to talk through that today. But the first part in this 4-part approach is we as teachers have to provide frequent, rich, and varied language experiences, right? We give them opportunities to read, to listen, to read aloud, to write using the words that we know. As we meet with them to discuss their writing, we might push them to use more complex words or juicy words, as you might call them. In discussions, we kind of push them to use stronger words than just those very basic, simple words. And through listening to people speak with a strong vocabulary, a precise vocabulary. And one of the ways that we do this is just encouraging them to read and to listen to read aloud as much and as widely as possible. I know for myself, like there's nothing I love. I mean, I love words, like I love learning words and things like that. But for students, as they listen to fairy tales, as they listen to nonfiction read alouds, they're picking up those words, right? And it's not wrong for them to stop you and ask you what a word means. That's a wonderful thing. That's a standard in K-2, right? We want them to kind of ask questions about unfamiliar words. So we want them to do that. We want them to read in a variety of different content areas, not just books that they like, right? Because if they love playing Fortnite, they're going to know every word in Fortnite and what it means and use it precisely, right? But as we are reading to them across a variety of content areas, so they're going to be exposed to many, many different words, which is really, their brains are like sponges. They're going to pick those words up, or they're going to seek information about those words. So that first part of teaching vocabulary is really just exposure, providing them with many different and varied types of language experiences so that they can be exposed to many different words. Now, the second part might be a little new for us, right? But this is teaching individual words, you know, and this might be a habit that maybe we've gotten away from. You know, I talked to you how back in the day, like when I was in school, they did teach those individual words. And it feels like for a while we kind of got away from that. But this is a key part of vocabulary instruction. Teaching individual words through active and robust instruction. And in a couple of slides, I'm going to kind of model this for you, and I'm going to show you what this might look like in a class. It doesn't have to take 45 minutes. It can be a very brief 5-minute thing where you introduce a word, you know, a word that's really relevant to the work that they're doing, you know, the content that you're exposing to them. And you're teaching it systematically and explicitly. You know, you're going to carefully select these words, high leverage words, right? If you're teaching in a particular content area, what is a word that they're going to hear time and time again as you learn about this particular content that's really going to deepen their understanding of this content? You're going to want to provide them with definitional and then contextual information. You know, what is the definition of this word? And then in what context is it appropriate to use? You're going to connect it to words that they already know, activate that prior knowledge. You might compare and contrast this word with other similar and different words that they've learned. And you can draw upon their understanding of morphology, you know, if it has a similar prefix or suffix or, you know, word origin, help them make those connections, but you're going to compare and contrast those things. You're going to encourage them to make inferences sometimes about what they think the word might mean. You know, if it's a word that has re as a prefix, right? And we've introduced many different words with re as a prefix. You might get them to guess what that word might mean based on what they know about the structure of that word. And then this is so important. And to me, this was the fun part as a teacher. But you're going to create opportunities for frequent encounters, right? You're going to use that word as much as possible. You know, we're going to talk about a word in a second. I'm going to share with you guys like how I would use this throughout the day, right? Just to kind of increase the precision of their language, but also, you know, make them deeper consumers of words. And we'll kind of get to that in just a second, but I do want to get through this 4-part approach. We're also going to teach them word learning strategies, right? Like, what do you do when you come across a word that you don't know? How do you use those context clues? How do you use those word parts, those prefixes, those suffixes? And then when you can't use context clues or word parts, or it's kind of taking you nowhere, when do you go to these resources like dictionaries, thesauruses, and other tools like that? And you know, it's often we want that to be one of their best friends if they don't know what a word means. We want them to seek out the answer, seek out that definition, and not just kind of gloss over it, because surely if they do that, it's going to impede their comprehension. And then this is another just awesome thing as a teacher to do, but just fostering that word consciousness. You know, they've done studies and they've shown that like stronger readers will stop when they encounter a word that they don't know. And weaker readers just kind of keep on moving through. They'll read a word, they might be able to decode it. They might have enough knowledge of the code to decode the word appropriately, but they have no clue what it means and they keep on moving. But your job as a teacher is to really foster that word consciousness among your students. Create a word-rich environment in your classroom. You know, encourage your students to use good, strong, precise words instead of just really basic, simple words. Recognize and promote adept diction. You know, we want them to pronounce these words correctly and say them correctly. Encourage them to play with words, to promote that word play. Foster it through their writing, right? If there's a better word that they can use, definitely push them to use that word in their writing. You know, instead of saying just, you know, the cat was nice, you could say the cat was delightful. You know, push them to use those juicier words and get them to love words, right? Like always wanting a better word than just the most simple word they can find to communicate their ideas. And then involve students in original investigations. If you're talking to them and they're trying to communicate something to you and you're like, I know there's a better word to describe what you're saying, investigate that, like push them to kind of discover what that word might be using things like thesauruses or dictionaries, things like that. And if you're doing all of these things, you are going to support the acquisition of vocabulary among your students. If you're doing this 4-part approach to teaching vocabulary, exposing them to many different words through rich and varied language experiences, that direct instruction, teaching them about word parts, and then just really fostering that word consciousness, that awareness of words and their responsibility for determining what words mean when they don't know, your kids are going to leave your class with amazing vocabularies. I mentioned before, I love learning new words, and I think, I guess I'm a geek or something like that. But like, I really do love learning and using new words myself, and so I'd always like promote that with my students and stuff. And I told you guys before that I was a kindergarten and a first grade teacher, but I had a student once, and I'll never forget this sweet little boy. And he came out, and he, we were just winding up to go use the restroom, and he came out and he was like, so-and-so was behaving very mysteriously in the bathroom. And, I had to go investigate what that meant in the bathroom, but like, it brought joy to my heart to hear him use such a juicy word to kind of describe what was happening. But, it's great when you start to see them using those words in context. So, it's fun. Now, I told you guys before that I was going to kind of model how you might teach vocabulary. And like I said, you don't need 20, 30 minutes to do this. This is brief, right? So, you're thinking through a target word, right? And so maybe I'm doing a unit on food or foodways or something like that. And, I'm like, okay, I really want to really zero in on this word scrumptious. Okay, so I'm identifying scrumptious as a target word. And a lot of times our curricula already do this for us. But for me, if I'm going to zero in on this word scrumptious, right? Now, I'm just going to kind of model how I would do this with my students, but I might start off by saying something like, okay, guys, in our read aloud today, we heard that the birthday cake was scrumptious. Say the word scrumptious with me. And they would say, scrumptious. And then I would give them the definition, and I would say scrumptious means extremely tasty or delicious. Another example is that macaroni and cheese is scrumptious. Right here, they might jump in and say, oh yes, macaroni and cheese is scrumptious. Or they might say, I don't think that's scrumptious. I don't like macaroni and cheese, right? But then I'm going to go on and I'm going to give them opportunities to practice it really quick. And I would say something like, I'm going to tell you some more words, and I want you to tell me whether or not these things are scrumptious. So you're going to say either that's scrumptious or that's not scrumptious. Okay, and so then I'd stop, and then I'd say, okay, a table. And then hopefully they would all go, that's not scrumptious. Ice cream, that's scrumptious. Toys, that's not scrumptious. Pizza, that's scrumptious. You see how we move through it? And then, if we got to a point where, we get to chicken nuggets, I might have some say that's not scrumptious, and then some say that's scrumptious. And a way for me to really deepen their understanding of this word is I might ask a student who said it's not scrumptious to tell me, why do you not think that chicken McNuggets are scrumptious? And then have them explain. And really, that's going to push all of the students to deepen their understanding and increase their ownership of that word scrumptious. Then I might end by saying something like, can you think of anything else that is scrumptious? And then it's a candy or popcorn or something like that. And then this is a great word because this is a one that's so easy for you to use throughout the rest of the day. So, I find many different opportunities to use that word, like maybe in the cafeteria, like when just, oh, it looks like we're having Salisbury steak today. That is scrumptious. I hope you guys enjoy that scrumptious lunch, right? And I guarantee you, just working with these little ones, they're going to want to impress you with that vocabulary and they're going to like it because now they can, use a word that's so much more powerful than just yummy or good. So you're going to hear them using it. And then if they use it independently or in another context, man, that is an opportunity to celebrate and to really reinforce that. Because you know how those kids are. Like, I mean, you praise one of them, they're all going to start doing it. They're all going to start using it. So, anytime any of my students would use like a word that we had worked on, I definitely would like, just kind of praise it like crazy because it becomes reinforcing for all of the students in the class. Now, repeated exposure to vocabulary items is important for learning gains. You can't just kind of use the word once and then forget about it, right? The best gains are made in instruction that extends beyond single class periods. So like I said, I'm, in this imaginary unit that I'm doing on food. And then yesterday I taught them the word scrumptious. And then today I'm talking about baking bread in a bakery, as part of this unit. I'm going to make sure I'm using that word scrumptious, or what might be a word that you would use to describe the bread that's made in this bakery, and really give them those repeated exposures and those repeated opportunities to practice it in class, but also in authentic context outside of the classroom, the cafeteria, here in Louisiana, and, king cake season, right? Oh, this king cake is scrumptious. Or when the kids bring in cupcakes for their birthdays, oh, these cupcakes are scrumptious, You're using these words in many different contexts just to reinforce that learning and solidify it for them. Repetition and multiple exposure to vocabulary items are important. And that's why that word selection is so important. As you're building knowledge in a particular content area, before you begin the unit, if you're planning this unit on your own or you're developing this unit on your own, you're going to identify what are these keywords that kind of can be utilized in multiple different contexts in this particular content area, or even across several different content areas, so that you can use them multiple different times in many different ways. So definitely you want to do that with your students. Give them that many different ideas. Now, just some final thoughts here. Vocabulary instruction really is crucial for reading comprehension. If students don't understand what the words mean, they're going to struggle to understand the book, as you might expect. We have many diverse learners in our classrooms and in our schools. And for some of these students, I think that in particular about English language learners, right? Like you can really engage them, through comprehensible input, if you've taken classes on English as a second language, right? If it's a word that maybe isn't super easy for them to understand or is more abstract with an English language learner, you might be like, if you're teaching the word scrumptious, oh, scrumptious, and then rub your belly, right? Like, and really model it physically, give them multiple ways to understand it, because that's going to support their comprehension. Speaking specifically about like English language learners or maybe students with limited vocabulary, if you're doing a read aloud that has some vocabulary words that you think might be a challenge for them, pull them aside before you begin the read aloud and say, hey guys, I just wanted to go over a few of these words with you that we're going to talk about today because I think it'll help you when we're reading our story. And that'll really make it more meaningful for them as they get exposed to it. You can do that whole class, or you can just do it with the students who need it. Vocabulary instruction needs to be provided through multiple modalities: direct instruction, implicit instruction, extensive reading and speaking opportunities, word learning, and again, developing that word consciousness. Their understanding should be that It's never okay not to understand what a word means, right? You want to build that in them such that when they hear a word and they don't know what it means, they're stopping you and asking you. And then you can prompt them to either use clues from the text or go find a tool that's appropriate. But we never want them just kind of be like, oh, I don't know what that word means. That's fine. I'm going to move on, right? We wouldn't want that. I don't want that for myself. So encouraging them to have that word consciousness. And they really just have to come and to know and understand and really appreciate words, what they mean, how they're used, and what to do when they encounter a word that they don't know. And you as a teacher just reinforcing the use of the most precise, the most appropriate words, and not just taking it for granted that we're not just allowing, very basic vocabularies when they can really be challenged and encouraged to use better words. And I mean, you guys can clearly see how that will impact their reading, but also their writing, right? The better the word, the better the writing. And I would always tell my students that back when I was a teacher, if there's a better word to use, we can use it. And so pushing that mindset with your students is key. So get them to love words as much as you do. And then they'll start using words that you haven't even used, and you'll be learning from them, and they'll be amazing. So our engage question today. So for those of you who are new, if you just take a moment to email me your response to this. And, I like to have like a little shout out deck right there at the beginning with your responses to these questions. But how does vocabulary impact comprehension? And how are you going to incorporate vocabulary instruction into your ELA block? So email me. They're going to post that in the chat. They'll post the question, but they'll also post my email address. Email me your response to that. I love reading your reflections and responding to your reflections. They've really pushed my own understanding and my own idea about what that can look like in the classroom. So I appreciate that so much from you guys. Keep up the great work. If you have any questions or concerns, email me. But please, please, please go ahead and complete our session feedback form. We're going to post that in the chat as well. If you need CLU credit, you can answer the question right there at the end, and I'll make sure that you get that CLU certificate. But other than that, please, fill that out and join us again on Friday for our office hours from 10:30 to 11. So we're going to meet with you guys, and if you have questions or if you just want to kind of learn a few little quick tidbits, things like that, join us 10:30 to 11 on Friday. If you need the Zoom link, you can email me and I can send that to you. But I appreciate you guys joining us and enjoy these last few weeks this summer, but I can't wait to get this school year started. You guys are going to dominate again this year. So have a great afternoon, and I will see y'all tomorrow.